Hey everyone! Today on the plastic canvas we're painting a Harpy from Arcadia Quest, Inferno. Hey everyone, Matt here from the Plastic Canvas and welcome to episode 3 in this Arcadia Quest Inferno painting series, and today we're painting the Harpy, which is one of the minions that you face in this game. Now before we get into talking about how I'm painting her up, just a quick couple of things to mention. The first is that in case you missed it in the intro there, I have started a Facebook, Twitter and Instagram account for this channel. So for Facebook, it's facebook.com/theplasticcanvas. For Twitter, it's @plasticcanvas_, and for Instagram, it's theplasticcanvas. Now, I'm mainly using this to post work in progress images so that you know what I'm working on at the time and what videos are going to be coming up soon. And then also links to the videos as they go up. But what I'm also hoping that you guys can do is, if there's anything that you get out of my videos, whether it's you take some colors that I've used or a particular technique, or you just straight up copy the way that I've painted a mini, whatever, I'd love it if you could post pictures of the minis that you've painted up onto those channels so that I can see the way that my painting may be influencing what you guys are doing. A couple of you guys have already done that, and I really enjoyed seeing those pictures, so please do post them to those different channels if you use my videos as any sort of a guide. Now the other thing that you will notice is that there is a slightly different format for this video to ones in the past, because in the past I have been talking along while I'm actually painting and filming, and then just speeding the footage up while I'm painting and not talking. Whereas for this one I am speeding up the whole footage and then narrating over the top. And the reason that I'm doing this is to try and shorten the videos a little bit, because they have been getting a bit longer as I'm doing more and more with the minis. And I'd love to hear in the comments down below which format you prefer, whether you like the videos to be shorter and I just talk over the top but can't quite go into things as in-depthly as what I have in the past, or if you'd rather the videos be a bit longer and I can more thoroughly talk about, you know, the process that I'm going through and why I'm doing things the way that I am. Alright, so with those two things out of the way, just to catch you up with what I've done so far, I cleaned up a couple of mould lines that were mainly on the base of the Harpy. There's one thing that I've noticed with this game is that, being from CMON, the minis are really good, and there are very few mould lines. But what I notice is that within one particular sculpt, so like there's about 3 or 4 of this sculpt of the Harpy, is that you might find one that has some mould lines and the others don't. So it is just a thing to look out for if you're painting these minis. You may have already painted a couple and you had no problems. Just make sure you do keep an eye out before you get too far into it, because you may find that stray one that's got some mould lines. So I just use my hobby knife just to take care of them. Then I primed her, did a zenithal prime, so hit her with black first all over, then with grey from a fairly high angle, and then with white from directly above. Then I took a couple of pictures so that then when I get to highlighting and shading, I can refer back to those pictures and use that as a guide for where the deepest shadows should be and where the brightest highlights should be. I don't go down the using it as pre-shading road. I use it more for as a guide for my highlighting. So now just into base coating. All not much to mention about there, except for when I went to do a blend in the wings, I went to do purple through to green, because in the artwork for the Harpy there's a bit of OSL. So you can see that the wings are purple, but there's some green light being cast across, and I thought that actually looked pretty cool. So I wanted to do an actual blend within the wing, but as you can see, whoa, it looked bad. They just did not blend together at all. So I totally ditched that, went straight to purple. What I end up doing is a blend from purple through to blue, and I stick with that because I think it looks really, really good. But I'm just laying a foundation for that now with the purple. So one of the ways that my painting has changed a lot, especially in the last few months, is the contrast that I build up with my highlights. I try and get a really, really sharp contrast between my brightest highlights and my deepest shadows. And the main reason for that is because I paint board game minis, no one's going to be looking at these minis up close. They're going to be sitting in the middle of the table. And so for things to be seen from the edge of the table, the highlights and the shadows really, really need to be pushed. So as you can see, I started with Viper Green for her hair there, but what I come back with in the next coat is Brilliant Green, which is a deeper green, and then further on, I then do a green wash over the top, and then when I highlight, I then bring it back up to the Brilliant Green, and then highlight further still with Viper Green, and then I come back with Pale Green mixed with a little bit of white. And so what that does is it gives a real depth of colour, and so from the deepest shadow to the brightest highlight, there's a really, really big difference, and so that's really easily seen from, when she's going to be in the middle of the table, people playing the game are on the edge of the table. It's just going to bring that out a lot better. So yeah, in the past I would have hit it with the green like that, maybe done a wash and then just highlighted back up to that base coat. But now as I'm pushing the contrast, I'm trying to start with a bit of a deeper tone to then deepen that even further and then start to bring it back up, just to really, really build that contrast. In the first few months of my painting, and I've been painting for just under a year or so now, I used to really get quite in my own head about the way that my painting looked compared to how other people's did that I was watching at the time. And one thing that I really always noticed is that my minis looked, I guess bland would be the word, compared to other people's. Because, there were lots of flat colours and just didn't look very exciting or like much was going on. And I'd say at the moment that's kind of how the Harpy's looking. What I've really sort of come to find out is that when you're painting, your mini quickly goes from looking bland, I suppose is the word for lack of a better term, but going from bland to really looking finished off very, very quickly when you get to the final details step and doing lots of the touching up. So you can see at the moment I'm doing the Amethyst purple around the bow there. That's kind of what I'm sort of talking about, but towards the end, I do red lining on her armour, paint her eyes, little skulls here and there. Those sorts of things just really, really help to finish the mini off, and I think it's because it breaks up the colours. Because at the moment I've got grey for all of her clothes, the top of her wings, green for her hair, and then 2 shades of purple. That's all that's going on at the moment, and it does look quite flat. But then towards the end when I do the sort of the pinstriping on the edge of the armour with the red, she's got a couple of spikes on the side of her legs, her eyes get done, her mouth, all those little things that don't really seem like much in the grand scheme of things really help break the colours up and it just takes the Mini to another level. So if, like me, you sort of look at yours and think, geez, there's just something missing, that could be all it is. So I then just really started to look for little things within the Mini that I could pick out that I wasn't really doing much in the past. So, you know, belts and buckles and just all those little details that help to break up the colour, find them, pick them out, and they really, really help to finish the Mini off and take it from looking kind of flat to, yeah, having a lot more depth, breaking up those colours and just finishing it off well. And once I got over that and stopped worrying about it through the actual Mini, I really enjoyed my painting a lot more, and it freed me up to just get those base coats done and not worry about the little details. Because while I'm painting her, I knew the parts that I was going to be coming back to pick out, and so yeah, I know that yep, it's looking a bit flat, a bit boring at the moment, but when those things get done at the end, that's when it's going to help lift it. So yeah, it freed me up to enjoy my painting a bit more, and sped me up as well because I didn't worry about those details as I was painting. But yeah, have a look for those things that you can pick out those little details to help break everything up. Alright, so here I'm starting the blends from scratch again on the wings. The reason that I'm going back and doing that again is because there was, you mightn't have picked it up on the camera, but there were too many defined lines between one tone and another. So between the purple and the medium blue and then through to the light blue. So I thought at first about maybe just trying to feather those edges out a little bit, but I thought, no, it's going to be quicker to start it again. So yeah, back to starting it again. But I think what helped is that because I already had that base underneath of the blend, it helped smooth out the final blends that I did, because there were already those colours underneath. The other thing that I also did that I wanted to push further than the first time that I blended is the brightness of the blue at the tips of the wings. So you can see here in this part that I'm doing on that wing there, I'm pushing it to almost white with the highlights that I do right on the edge, because like I was talking about earlier, one of those ways that my painting has changed a lot is how much further I'm pushing the contrasts. So going from that purple through to a really, really light blue, almost white, just really pushes that blend more, because when she's in the middle of the table and people are sitting around the edge, you know, are a meter away or whatever, I want that blend to be seen. And going from purple through to just sort of like a mid blue, that just didn't come through enough. So yeah, so starting it again, and much happier with how it's looking, and yeah, I think just catching the edge with that really, really light blue, almost white, just finishes it off nicely, gets that good contrast, and yeah, those blends are seen a lot better, and the change in the tone is seen a lot better from, you know, when sitting around the edge of the table. I mentioned in the last Inferno video, which was the Demoness, or at least I think it was that video, about how I think, or how overused I think washes are. I think they're too much of just a go-to, use them on everything, you know, part of the hobby. But obviously I'm using them here. Now, the reason that I'm using washes here as opposed to just layering up the shadows and then the highlights is because there's a bit of detail in this mini and it's quite close together. So even in her face, her eyes are set in and then her nose sticks out quite a bit right in the middle. She's got quite protruding cheekbones. All those sorts of things where washes work really, really well because they just fall nicely into the recesses. There aren't really many broad surfaces in this mini. So yeah, I find sometimes if you're using a wash on a broad surface, it can, any inconsistencies in the wash really, really show up. And I find for myself, I don't know whether it's just something about the way that I do it, but I find that it can go a little blotchy sometimes. And so I really try and, or at least now I'm trying to avoid using it on broader surfaces. And I just, with really, really thin down paints, layer up the shades. But because in this mini, like I mentioned with the face, bit of detail in there, parts are sunken and sticking out, her hair, quite a bit of texture in there, all those sorts of things are perfect for a wash because it falls so nicely into the recesses and then just highlight up from there. But yeah, I definitely think that washes are overused and it's definitely a thing that I'm trying to be more mindful of now and actually thinking about, am I just using a wash because that's just what you do and because it's, you know, as people call it, liquid talent? Or is it actually a purposeful thing right now? So if you've got that texture and that detail, go for it, or at least I go for it. But if the detail isn't there and they're flatter surfaces and they're more like folds and things like that, especially in like clothing, I find it's better to, with thin paint, layer up the shadows and then do the highlights. So in here, as I'm highlighting the hair, this is what I was talking about earlier when I changed from base coating her hair with Viper Green to Brilliant Green, because you can see the depth of the colour there with that really, really deep green that I haven't touched after using the wash, and then now working up to pale green, even with a little bit of white mixed in to hit those highest level of the highlights. And I'm really, really happy with how her fringe especially looks. I think I've got quite a nice gradient of colours there, and yeah, it really makes the hair sort of pop. And when she's in the middle of the table and people are sitting around the edge, a metre or so away, that contrast in the hair is going to come out, and those little details aren't going to get lost. But when I first started, and there was a much, much smaller gap between my deepest shadows and my brightest highlights, those details just got lost. Whereas now there's a much, much bigger gap between my shadows and highlights. So yeah, all those details come out a little bit more, and it's just simply by starting with a darker colour and finishing with a brighter one. I keep going on about it, but the contrast that I'm building up with my highlights is probably the biggest way that my painting has changed in the last few months. And you can see here, I started with, and if you're not familiar with the colours, it won't mean too much, but Stormy Grey for the first layer of the highlighting, which is quite a dark grey. And then I just finished off there with Misty Grey, which is very, very bright, almost white. And the way that I was able to build from a deep grey up to a very, very bright grey is just lots of layers with just little changes in between. So the first highlight is just, so the base coat was Stormy Grey with a little bit of black mixed in to make it an even darker grey. Then my first highlight was just Stormy Grey, which was just a little bit lighter than that. Then it was some Stormy Grey mixed with Cloudy Grey, which is the next brightest grey, and then just didn't quite highlight as much, and then worked up to just Cloudy Grey, and then, highlighting less, and then working up eventually to Misty Grey, where I then barely highlighted anything at all. But then you get that really big difference between the deepest shadows and then that brightest highlight. And that's just simply by starting with a really, really deep colour and then just gradually lightening little by little, and then just highlighting less and less and less as it gets brighter and brighter and brighter towards that highest concentration of light. And I also feather out the edges of my highlights. I'm a brush licker, so I put the paint down, lick it off, and then with the wet bristles feather it out, and then put the next highlight in the exact same spot, but just don't feather it as far. And that's how I get my transitions and my blends, and then yeah, just gradually lighten the paint off. But when I first started painting, and certainly for the first couple of months, if I was, say, highlighting her armour there, would have painted it grey, and then probably gone straight to a bright grey, and just done one single highlight, and it would have been as simple as that. Whereas yeah, now it's many, many layers, with each just getting a little bit lighter than the last, and then just feathering the edges out to try and get a smooth transition. Alright, so this is this section that I was talking about earlier when I was saying about taking the mini from looking quite flat and kind of boring with just base coats to really lifting it to the next level and finishing it off with those finer details. So you can see there's those red rings around her arms and the pinstriping on the edge of her armour. Her eyes are done now. You know, the red on her fingernails, just all those little things. Even though each on their own is a very, very small detail, they really add up to help break the colours up, and it just really finishes the mini off. And I think it's a really, really important step, and yeah, if you're early on in the paint, in your paint job, and thinking, geez, it just doesn't look very exciting, yeah, look for those little things that you can pick out, whether they are buckles or bracelets or bits of jewellery or whatever it is, that'll just help break the colours up. And you can see the difference there because it's really come along just simply by doing that step. Alright, so here I'm painting the cracked Grelin Earth black to sort of simulate volcanic rock, and then there's like that lava sort of flowing underneath. Now you would have noticed when I was actually putting the lava effect down, I painted some of it up into the rock that she's standing on to then kind of give the effect that she's on a bit of a volcanic rock and that there is some lava kind of coming up on that rock that she's standing on as well. In my head, it looked really, really good. What's actually ended up happening is that where the Grelin Earth cracked on that rock that she's standing on, it's only done really, really fine cracks, and so not as much of that paint has come through as what I was hoping. So what I would do next time is, rather than trying to just paint that lava coming up in some parts, I would just paint the whole thing that she's standing on in that lava effect, and then whack the Grelin Earth over it, because you don't know where it's going to crack. At least wherever it does crack, that colour's going to come through. So yeah, I was a little disappointed with how it looked. It didn't quite do what I hoped it would. Overall, it's still fun. I'm still happy with how it looks, but yeah, disappointed that didn't come through as much. But yeah, so next time that's what I do different. Paint the whole thing red, orange, and yellow. And yeah, then if it doesn't crack as much as I want it to, then it doesn't matter, because it will still be coming through wherever there are those cracks. Alright, so last couple of things happening now to finish the Harpy off. So just this skull on this side of the base to just to help balance it out. It just looked a little bit plain on this side. And then I'm going to do a matte varnish. And I'm doing a matte varnish instead of spray because I have read of some people using a spray after using a Grelin Earth and some of those flakes flying off. So yeah, so she's just about done. So thank you very, very much for stopping by and watching me paint another mini. Really do appreciate any time that you guys put into watching these videos. As always, I really hope you've gotten something out of this video, something that you can take away and use in your own painting, or you've just simply enjoyed watching me paint the Harpy. So please stop by Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and check those out and post some pictures if you use any of these videos as a guide. And please leave a comment down below, something that you like about the video, something that can be improved, especially whether you like this format or the previous one more. And yeah, please do like and subscribe to keep up to date with these videos as they keep coming out. So with all of that being said, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.